I was riding in the back seat of my friend's extended cab Dodge, heading north up the park's highway from Willow, Alaska, towards Trapper Creek. It was late around midnight, lightly snowing but steady. We came around a bend in the highway when my buddy's girl screamed. I looked up as my buddy hit the brakes hard. There on the right east shoulder of the road was a large bipedal figure. As we came to a stop, maybe 50 to 75 feet from it, it looked directly towards us. Then it stepped out, crossing the road in 3 strides, and then stepped over the snowbank on the west side and was gone. It didn't waddle, almost like a bear standing up and walking. It walked fluidly. I'd say at least 8 feet tall, maybe more, no taller than 10 though. Really large and muscular. Not much of a distinction between head and shoulders, like you couldn't make out its neck. Matted dark hair, like a hippie with dreadlocks. Mind you, we had floodlights on top of the truck. We could see it clear as day. We always had those lights on at night for moose, only turning them off for oncoming traffic. Its arms were long, longer than a human could be in proportion. We just sat there for a few, stunned, I guess. People can say whatever they wish about them being real or not. I honestly thought it was sort of like a lore up to that point. However, after that, there is zero doubt in my mind as to the reality of their existence. No idea what they would actually classify as. Maybe some primate, I guess. But they are real, I promise you that. Seeing is believing, and I will never forget that. I had one on August 7th, 2019 in Michigan. Daytime sighting, very close to where I was standing while fishing a creek. About 11 feet tall, scratching its back on a pine tree. One crossed the highway in front of me near daybreak in a very remote area in the early morning hours when I was heading to sturgeon fish near the Oregon-Washington border. Looked right at me, crossed in 3 steps, fluid, effortless. Yes, I had one in August of 1984 in Rockwood, Pennsylvania. There's a story of a headless ghost by the river near my house. Sometimes after dark, I feel like a madman is chasing me. It might just be him. My grandparents and my uncles and my mom, my Uncle Jack lived outside of Topeka and lived off the river, and one night we heard screaming. My cousin went out on the porch, and you could see it rocking side to side behind a tree. Back then, they called it the Momo Monster. In the 80s in East Texas, I saw something I cannot explain run across a timber road where our deer lease was located. Later, I also saw something large and dark-colored standing in those same woods, just watching. Was it Bigfoot? I don't know. Could it have been? Maybe. I've had one, but it was in the 70s in the Rockies, Colorado. My friend's uncle has some homemade hearing aids and can tune them to hear the skunk ape deep breathing in the Ochese Pond Swamp. I grew up in the Hocking Hills of southern Ohio and saw something that made me think twice about going out by myself at night, but never actually saw Bigfoot. My first encounter was the scariest for me. I was in the woods before sunrise in Central Oregon with my first husband, who was getting ready to hunt elk. We were sitting in our truck, waiting for just enough daylight to go out and scout. The truck was backed up to the edge of the forest. After just a few seconds of sitting there, I got freaked out beyond words. There was something really big and really angry behind us in the trees. I couldn't see it, I just felt it all at once. I went into full panic mode, even though I was experienced with nighttime forest activity. This was different. My husband felt it too, so we left. My husband admitted later that he and his brother had seen something in the area during the previous elk season, but it didn't seem important after the fact.
I've never personally had an encounter, but I know of a place not far from me, about 1.5 hours to the Stanislaus National Forest, and there are tree structures, legitimate footprints have been cast there, and just tons of signs. Definitely a huge difference in the energy around this area. Had one encounter with Sasquatch above Willow Creek at Beans Camp. Took place in the countryside outside the Chillicothe, Illinois, near Peoria, in October of 2006. I saw what you guys could call a toddler Bigfoot on my second of 2 encounters. I was wearing camouflage, sitting about 20 feet off the ground, deer hunting, when all of a sudden I heard something bipedal walking through the woods. I believed it to be my cousin coming to hunt the stand I was in. I turned my head and upper body toward the noise. Much to my surprise, I saw approximately 7.5 foot tall, around 500 pound, hairy creature that froze in place looking at me. After a few seconds, it let out a large huff noise, and at this point, a smaller one, around 2 feet, hard to estimate the weight, stepped out from behind a tree and climbed onto the back of the larger one. It was quick and nimble, reminded me of a baby chimp climbing over its mother, only more human. After what seemed like minutes, but was probably only 40 seconds, the big one started to back away from me without ever taking its eyes off me. The little one just clung there, looking straight away. Once this thing was around 30 yards from me, it was just like it vanished into thin air, away. It blended back into the woods. Had my first encounter 50 years ago, squirrel hunting in Wakatomoka. Actually saw an 8 to 9 foot male, all black. What a big fella. Then about 30 years later, had an encounter, and not sure which it was, out near Bliss Field. The sound it made, the growl rumbled through my body, so hard it reverberated in my chest. No visual, but definitely only a few feet between me and him. Then had a wolfman encounter. I got a photo in the fall of 2020. So yes, they are here, believe it or not. But I know what I heard and what I saw, all true. Had witnesses to all, but one when I was hunting, my very first encounter. When I was 15, it was less than 100 feet from me. The one that growled at us was less than 30 feet from me. Couldn't see it, but definitely rumbled my body. In 2020, fall, I was taking pictures of the leaves because they were turning. My vehicle was lined up so I was facing the small bank it was standing on, actually only about 50 to 60 feet from the front of my phone. All these encounters were within a circle about 40 miles from Coshocton, Ohio. Also, actually had rock clacking at Wills Creek. It was fast and furious. Didn't see one, just heard it clacking rocks. I believe that I heard one in July of 2016 in Washington. Found very strange scat at my grandparents' farm in southern Ohio near Wheeling, West Virginia, and Moundsville on the Ohio River. 2 of them. First, Craig County, Virginia. Second, Smoky Mountains, between Cherokee, North Carolina, and Gatlinburg, Tennessee. No visual encounter, but I've heard vocalizations back in 2017 on Mount Hood in Oregon. Had an encounter in 1980 in Pennsylvania around Meadville. I was 18, still shocked. Once you see it, well, the rest is eternity. Had an encounter in Cambodia, 1974. The locals called them rock apes. I did twice, 30 years apart, northern Ontario, Canada, and north central Pennsylvania. 1984, Fort Lewis, Washington. Never said anything. I was in the Army, and you know how that would have went. Probably a mental discharge. Seen one when I was 16. I'm 60 now. It was white, and there was 4 inches of snow on the ground. It jumped off the bank in front of the car. It was close to dark. The next day, I called my friend over. We went back to the spot and followed tracks in the snow. They went inside an old, tore-down house, root cellar. We could see when it went in and out by the tracks. So we went inside and the place was full of animal bones. This was in Pickens County, Jasper, Georgia, 1978. 1968, Chuckanut Mountain, Bellingham, Washington. I saw something black walking across my pasture in Mississippi. My dad would tell me stories in the 30s in Ohio County in Kentucky of a wild man they would talk about in the hills. It was a Bigfoot, but back then in the county, they just called him "Wow, man," and stayed clear of the area. It was back around 1968 when I was about 9 years old. My dad died and my babysitter, that was 2 years younger, when I started sleeping with my mom downstairs. We had a bed up by the window. I laid by my window, loved looking out at night. I came face to face with, now what I would say, had to be a little one. We had the window that was kind of long. He was a butt in half of it. I think he wanted my sister. I was playing around town all the time riding bikes. I just went back to the house and it looked different now. Now the window is gone where we seen each other, but it didn't scare me. Witnessed a family of 3 Bigfoot, Estatica Lake, Oregon. My fishing buddy had a face-to-face confrontation with one. He was in East Texas, Lake Livingston. It watched him catch a lot of fish, then lie down in his skiff to grab a little sleep. He was suddenly awoken by a leaning on the side of the skiff, which tilted from his position, a mud bank about 500 yards from the shore. He sprang up and was reaching into the cooler for the fish. He is 6'4", a big guy. Thought better of it and turned, left tipping the skip from the mud bank. He was scared and told me 2 days later. He described the stench and the silver gray hair in the gray part of the face. It freaked him out so much, he came off the water, sold his boat, and left town for a bit to get his head together. The experience shocked him so much. Sadly, he died a couple months ago, well before his time. In the early 70s, while hiking the Rawa Wilderness of Colorado, we'll never forget the deep, guttural howls. 2 encounters, Whidbey Island, Washington. They were walking through a heavily wooded area. Encountered Sasquatch the fall of 1987 on Fort Lewis, Washington. Moores Creek, backside of Mount Rainier, in a roadless area. Lasted about an hour. It followed me to a clearing where I sat with a tree at my back. Circled for an hour or so. Wandered off to the southwest. I had an encounter about 12 years ago. My shepherd was barking like I never heard before, so I went out backyard to put him in the shed. Then I heard a growl. Never heard like that before in my life. It made my hair stand up. I ran so fast back to my porch, was listening, but was really scary. Locked the door, got my 12 gauge. I will never walk in those woods. Me and my wife, in the Mastini National Forest, northern Lower Michigan. Father and mother, as well as 2 children. 1983, just off 7 Devils Road, southern Oregon coast, just outside of Charleston, Oregon. I walked into a large field and saw Bigfoot. It had its hand on a tree branch. Afterward, when I measured, it was about 7 feet tall. It looked at me and seemed curious. A different time, I found a footprint. I was 14. It was 1977 summer camp, Jumonville, in the Chestnut Ridge region of Pennsylvania. We snuck out at night and went to an area called Topside. Something large was nearby. It made more than enough noise for us to hear and paralleled us as we went back out of the woods. We saw nothing, but something was there. We joked about Bigfoot, but thought it was a bear. Since then, I've encountered a number of bears in the woods, and they run away pretty quickly. Absolutely not PA black bear behavior. 2 separate encounters. One, a male, less than 30 feet from me. The other, a female and juvenile female, howling and tossing logs at me. Southern New Jersey in the early 1980s. I did in 2 places, for sure. One was Mark Twain National Forest, and the other was Ava, Missouri. Had a Sasquatch encounter that took place on the countryside outside of Chillicothe, Illinois, near Peoria, in October of 2006. My encounter was in 2015 in northeastern Vermont. It was awesome. Wasn't scared at all. My buddy was with me. We were hunting deer. Smoky Mountains, on the Appalachian Trail, on my way to Klingman's Dome. I have rocks thrown around me and towards me, years off and on. Down in Burlington, North Carolina, an old friend of mine had one peeking through the picture window. He was sitting on a couch in front of the picture window in the living room. He felt like that he was being watched, so he turned around, and there he was, staring right at him. Scared him to death. Now, if you mention Bigfoot, he goes into panic attacks. Had one walk across the road between Hawkins and Quitman, Texas. Scared the life out of me. It was so big. Building waterfalls on Chattahoochee River, close downtown, for rental cabins, 2020. I live in Ohio. In Killbuck, Ohio. I saw the big, and he was not mine. He was looking at me, I was looking at him. He didn't try to hurt me, and I didn't try to hurt him. I haven't myself, but my wife said she did sometime back in the 90s. She said she was camping up at Brown's Camp in the Oregon Coast Range, just off Highway 6. They were driving on a logging road in the dark, and she swears she saw one standing off the right side of the road. I asked her how much she had to drink, but she doesn't drink. I have no reason not to believe her. I moved to Southern Oregon 13 years ago from New England, and every one of my neighbors claimed to have some type of Bigfoot encounter. Most lived there all their lives. We lived in rural area off the city limits. I never did, thankfully. Many indigenous people of the area also told of Bigfoot encounters in the Illinois Valley, Klamath Mountain Range. In Washington, I seen one less than 25 feet away. Experienced twice. No sighting. Just above Cushman Dam in Washington State. I did back in 1991 while hunting in Barrow County, Georgia. Early 80s on our family land in the hills of northwest Connecticut had Sasquatch. 1975 in Kentucky from about 10 foot away at about 3 p.m. Central Time. I had an encounter 2013 Morristown, Tennessee with the Wild Man. 1986 Daniel Boone National Forest, Kentucky, Tennessee line by Highway 27 around 4:30 a.m. I had an encounter eastern Kansas, 13 miles from Missouri border, and eastern Oklahoma, north of Weber Falls. Had one when I was a child with my brothers. Blairsville, years ago. It was on top of the trail, throwing rocks down on us. What I can remember. Blue Mountains, just outside of Walla Walla, where we live. My girlfriend and I finally saw one. February 23rd, 2020, on Black Snake Ridge Road. We went from believers to knowers that evening. We went up to watch the sunset, but ended up seeing something a million times better. Was fishing on the Chattahoochee River, really overgrown area. Was walking downstream, fishing spots where I could get a rod through. Came up on him standing in the middle of the river. He was no more than 30 feet from me. He looked like he was just as surprised as I was, but only for a moment. Then he turned and went to the opposite bank and climbed up about a 12-foot bank and ran into the woods. I could hear him for about 2 minutes crashing through the brush. I was stunned for a few minutes before I was able to move. I turned around and went back to my truck. saw two tall, walking black shadows with green, glowing, and blinking eyes behind the cabin we rented in Jasper a few years back. About 15 years ago, here at Habersham County, Georgia, on the Chattahoochee National Forest. Yogo Creek, Montana. The reason I went from carrying a .44 Magnum to a .500 line ball. I live in Georgia, not too far from Pigeon Mountain. It was October, and I was 13 or 14. I know it was in 2007, 2008. I was outside on the phone with one of my friends. As soon as I come out, there was a strong odor smell, in which I thought there was maybe dead deer close in the wood line or something. So I was talking for a good 10 minutes. I heard swooshing, or like a slurping noise, in our pool behind me. I figured, okay, maybe my pool skimmer sucked a float, something got in. So I was halfway walking toward it, and I seen this hairy creature scooping and cupping water out of our pool. I stood and stared at it, and went to step backwards, and I guess I startled it because it went out this loud, ear-piercing screech, and it was heavy too. When I took off through the wood line, it was shaking all the way up till I got past our building, and I still heard it crashing through the woods. I took off so fast, I wrecked into my mom's flowers, hurtled over her dishwasher she was throwing out on the curb. She worked at the time, 30 minutes from home. We had one car, so my brother had to go get her, and I was off by myself. They both thought I was crazy for a bit. Then we had another encounter. Well, my uncle, brother, and cousin did. And whatever it was pretty huge too. I've seen a couple of things that weren't supposed to be there. A cougar in West Virginia before they were recognized as existing in the state. A 12-inch black and blue crayfish in Ohio. I once saw a pair of eyes glaring at me with low-quality flashlight, and whatever it was walked away. Sounded like a big dude walking away. It freaked me out. As a lover of things in the woods, I could tell you not to be doubtful of what you hear. Could prove to be true. I met a woman and her husband once who were very trustworthy folks. Told me of an encounter they had with something that described as a mad scientist experiment crossing the road 40 feet in front of their car late one night. From their description, I figured it to be a Sasquatch or a dogman. I used to assume no way a mammal that size could go unnoticed until I saw a mountain lion. After that, my mind is expanded, and I'm willing to consider things only thought to be in fairy tale and legend. I had a rock thrown at me twice. I could hear it, but I couldn't see it. I seen his red eyes. It wasn't an owl. There was nothing for an owl to perch on. It was about 4:30 in the morning on my way to work. I would like to see him in the daytime. In either 1975 or 76, along the Black River in Lorain County, crossed in front of my car with best friend as a passenger, scared the heck out of us. There were several reports over the next couple days. When I was 14 years old, on my family farm in Ohio at night, I was on my dirt bike, out riding in the field. Kept smelling something awful as a kid. I didn't think anything of it. It was a small woods by the field, so my headlights shined on the tree line. That's when I seen it. It was about 7 feet tall, dark brown hair. When I seen it, it was about 10 to 12 feet away. All year, we could hear loud screams and howls. Rest Haven, Castalia, Ohio, 1974. In a car, looked down the trail. He or she was crossing, turned around to go and investigate, and they were gone. 1986, Tomoka Estates, Florida, outside bathroom window, going for our chickens and rabbits. I did, in January 1979. I was 10 years old kid riding in the truck of my uncle in Carter County, Kentucky. It was running on all fours along a 5-strand barbed wire fence. My uncle stopped the truck and stepped out. Being a kid, I slid over the steering wheel and stood in the open door. It stood up and looked at us for 3 to 5 seconds. Then Flatfoot jumped the fence and continued on down through the trees. I got a good look at his face from about 30 feet away. I heard one down by Lake Erie at the state park. Scared the life out of me. I had an experience sometime between 2004 and 2007, driving on a country road near a reservoir in northeast Ohio. It was between 1 and 3 o'clock a.m. 2-lane road with maybe 10 to 15 feet mowed deep ditches into the wooded edges on both sides. Myself and my passenger both watched a large bipedal creature leap out from the left and with large running strides, just a few, clear the road into the woods on the other side. He came pretty close to my car as I slowed from approximately 40 to 30 miles per hour maybe, and we both got a good look. This animal was every bit as much as 7 feet tall, even being slightly hunched. It had long, reddish-brown, patchy hair hanging from its neck and off the shoulders mostly, from what I can remember. But the hair pattern continued to his feet. One distinguishing characteristic that threw me was it had less of a body shape of what we typically know of a Sasquatch, but reminded me of more of a lycanthrope. The legs it ran on had obvious canine anatomical features. It still today baffles me to what we saw, and he, the witness with me, will tell you the same detailed story I do. I've seen one multiple times. I lived near Salt Fork State Park in southeastern Ohio at the time. I've also heard howls and screams along with wood knocking. Had 2 encounters in northeastern Ohio. First one, a mom and a youngster. Second, looking in my bedroom window when I was 10. Lots of other howls and growls. I was close to Salt Fork on a trip staying in a cabin and got a knock back and heard rustling in the woods. I've seen more than one. Bellevue, Ohio, and seen one in Forest Pleasant Hill. Yeah, I saw one back in 1983, 1984, Portage County, Ohio. My son and his friend saw one, same county but different location, about 4 years back. When I was a child in the 70s, I saw one drinking from a creek in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. When it stood up, my friends and I all went scrambling for our bikes to get out of Dodge. My husband did, and got it on video as well in South Bloomingville. It's on YouTube. Not the best footage, but it never is it? We were camping at Lake Grant, Ohio, when we heard a horrible, angry, unearthly scream. We could hear the campers on the other side of the lake calling out to each other. What the heck was that? We could see movement in the woods and yellow eyes staring at us. We were trying to make sense of it all. The eyes were just too far apart to be an owl. We slept in our cars and left in the morning. I saw one as a kid, off in the distance, Pioneer Park, Zanesville, Ohio. The closest was about 8 feet away, looking at me through the kitchen window. It was rainy, stormy night, east shore of Lake Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. My 2 encounters were in the Pine Barrens of South Jersey while bow hunting myself, and 2 friends were lined up approximately 150 yards apart. Me being the deepest in the edge of the drop to the river, basically a saddle between 2 steep ravines. I heard the birds singing, crickets chirping, and then the woods went totally silent, and the squatch howled. Literally, I could feel it vibrating on my chest, looking through the woods all around me for the source. I saw a creature, a squatch, standing less than 30 feet away, peeking out from behind a massive oak tree. It was between 7 to 9 feet tall, muscular, conical head, almost human facial features. Brown piercing eyes. We stared at each other for what seemed like 15 to 20 minutes, till it huffed and ran off towards the scrub oaks. Then I got out of the tree stand and walked backwards to my closest friend. I asked, "Did you hear it?" I told him what I saw. He literally jumped out of his tree stand and went walking out while one of us watched our six. The other friend, he asked if we heard anything, told him the Squatch was definitely following us as we left the area. The encounter was a female and a young Squatch, 2 total. She was smashing logs to distract me while bow hunting the same area. To this day, my tree stand is still there, and I've never gone back to retrieve it. Not visual, but sounds and terrible smell that got worse when the steps and grunts got louder. Out in Yakult, Washington area. Hunting trip. I don't scare easily, but something told me to run. Overshot the vehicle by 3 yards, I'd say. I've seen tracks in north central Cascade Mountains of Washington state. If seeing red eyes through a window blinds count, then yes. The first one happened as a kid, and my memory of what happened is a little foggy at best, so it could be my brain repressing seeing more than the red eyes through the living room window at night. But I know for sure what I seen. Come from the corner of the house and stop to look inside. I've had 2 experiences with Sasquatch, and a friend of mine ran into a 4-foot juvenile while he was out walking along the top side of a river several years ago. They stood 10 feet apart staring at each other. Then the juvenile ran about 65 yards to a tree line, turned, and looked to my friend and screamed. My friend said there was no way of catching him, even if he wanted to. He's had like a female hiss like a cat at him, and rocks and branches thrown at him all along the river I was fishing at. I went to a small lake and met the guy. He's had Sasquatch steal his buck. He shot the buck, then followed the trail of blood. He said his father and him followed the blood. Where it bled out, there was no buck, just a trail of blood. They followed it for like 3 miles up a small mountain where an old coal mine was at. He said they could hear the Sasquatches, 2 of them, grunting and eating the buck. One of the Sasquatch stood up and looked below the mine entrance and seen the 2 guys. He said he raised his gun and the Sasquatch showed his teeth and started growling. The father then put the gun down before they end up like the buck. The 2 guys backed down the mountain, and when they got to the bottom, one Sasquatch followed them along the tree line. Once they were far enough away, the Sasquatch stopped following them. He said after the encounter, he now leaves a hind quarter in the woods for the Sasquatch. He's been gifted rocks, dead snakes, skunks, possums since then. I had experience on the Suwannee River around mile 13 to 14 up from the Gulf. It was on a week-long solo kayak trip the week of Thanksgiving 2020. Had an encounter in 2013, Osceola, WMA. Walked up on the one while deer hunting in the thick underbrush and head-high palmettos. It was not a pleasant encounter. Got footprint pictures from the Fakahatchee. Never seen one, but was screamed at somewhere down around Sebring. And I've been paced in the ONF back in the 80s. I lit up a tree with buckshot when I mistook it for Sasquatch once. There was this giant black snapping turtle that lived in the woods near my house. My sister and neighbor found it one time. Something Sasquatch-esque, but with some canine or bear-like features, but is certainly none of those things, given its sheer size. It sat on its haunches and knuckles like a gorilla, and even in that posture, it was at least 7 feet tall. It was unusually black, like it was painted in the Vanta black paint, and the vibe it gave off was alarming enough to make 2 other people in our group that was hiking turn back on the trail immediately and hike back to their cars. One thing I am sure of, it wasn't a Sasquatch. The thing gave me the impression it was a cross-dimensional creature. Couldn't tell you why though. It was pretty creepy. Alligators. A young woman in town married a man from another part of the country. He was a nice fellow. and they got along pretty well together. There was only one problem. Every night he'd go swimming in the river. Sometimes he'd be gone all night long, and she'd complain about how lonely she was. This couple had 2 sons. As soon as the boys could walk, their father began to teach them how to swim. And when they got to be old enough, he took them swimming in the river at night. Often they would stay there all night long. The young woman would stay home all by herself. After a while, she began to act in a strange way. At least that's what the neighbors said. She told them that her husband was turning into an alligator and that he was trying to turn the boys into alligators. Everybody told her there was nothing wrong with a man taking his son swimming. That was a natural thing to do. And when it came to alligators, there just weren't any nearby. Everybody knew that. Early one morning, the young woman came running into town from the direction of the river. She was soaking wet. She said a big alligator and 2 little alligators had pulled her in and had tried to get her to eat a raw fish. They were her husband and her sons, she said. They wanted her to live with them, but she had gotten away. Her doctor decided she had lost her mind, and he had her put in a hospital for a while. After that, nobody saw her husband and boys again. They just disappeared. But now and then, a fisherman would tell us about seeing alligators in the river at night. Usually it was 1 big alligator and 2 small ones, but people said they were just making it up. Everybody knows there aren't any alligators around here. Hey, I'm Connor from Bigfoot Anon, and I'm always on the hunt for the next big adventure. When you're on the trail for long hours, you build up quite the stench, enough to drive any skunk ape or yeti away. Luckily, I'm on the quest now for the solution to all my problems. Yeti bars. They do exist. Available in tons of different scents and fragrances. Check out yetibars.net for more and use my code BA10 for a special offer. Clean like a beast. Yeti bars!